All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Please, somebody leave a comment in the chat if you can hear me. Let's try again. All right. Welcome to this live stream. It is going to be a very informal, very casual live stream. I have never done a live stream before, so please bear with me. If you can hear me, if you'd be so kind and let me know in the chat that the audio is working, I would be very, very much obliged. And we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you, Cheryl. All right. Excellent. Okay. Hi. So we are doing a very, very informal conversation. I have never done it before. And the goal of this live stream is simply to get a little bit of a dialogue on the very, very big subject of the Hasidic economy, on which I recently published a video. And I tried to make the video as short, as succinct as possible, and also very clinical, and leave all of my personal opinions out of it. And I hope that it is edifying and that it effectively summarizes a very complex subject. It is really hard to communicate on such a difficult subject. So I thought that we would take questions and see. I'll take questions and see what you want to, what your thoughts were, and we'll just roll with it. So my suggestion is, if you want to ask me a question, that you type it in the chat with your name and where you're from, and I'll read it aloud and I'll answer it, because that's the extent of the capacity of YouTube's live stream. I can't have you on in video, unfortunately, for better or worse. Some people like the anonymity. So just leave your comment and or your question with your name. Jane Simmons asks about my haircut or a wig. I have a haircut. What do you think? I told the hairdresser I want something different. She said, "You sure? You can't put the hair back." I said, "Yes, I'm sure. It's fall. Needed something that feels fallish." So thank you, Malika Five, for saying love the hair. I'm practically begging. So let me tell you about making videos about Hasidic life, particularly this video. I really have been reluctant to do videos, to put my face out there, especially because I felt like it would make me a little too noticed in the streets of Williamsburg, where I give tours. I've liked to stay under the radar, sort of be an observer, fly in the wall. Once I'm noticed, I feel like maybe people interact with you differently. But at some point, I realized that writing a blog simply doesn't reach much of an audience. I've actually been writing a blog on the subjects that interest me on anthropology of Hasidic life for a long time, and I have not been getting much engagement. So I thought I'd do YouTube videos. And I've written quite a bit on the economy, and I will tell you, it is the question I get most often, and it is the hardest question to answer. There is so much happening in the Hasidic economy that may seem almost contradictory. For instance, the narrative in the ultimate book on Hasidic life, that on Hasidic history, that I would turn to, is the book Hasidism, A New History. And that book has a final chapter, a couple of final chapters on contemporary Hasidism. And in their version, the Hasidic economy is Hasidic economics are one of acute poverty. But then they go on to say that actually the community might not be as poor as they look. And I think largest problem is that a lot of the numbers that come out of the Hasidic community are not adjusted for population. They're not adjusted for family size, and therefore you take a median household income in Williamsburg versus median household income in Bushwick, let's say, and you compare it, you have a problem. You're not really adjusting for family size, which of course, is going to skew the Hasidic economy very, very differently than you have to take into account that they're very easily fall under the poverty line when you have 10 children. So I have been meaning to do a video on this. I have so many videos in the works. Now working on one on the high holidays, which is going to be in multiple iterations, which is going to be very fun. But I've been meaning to do this one in particular for a long time. And I just couldn't figure out a way to do it easily. And I actually put together a whole video that had been edited. It had been completed, and well, it was at 90%. And I recorded it, it was edited, and I was very unhappy with it. And I scratched it and I redid a new one. Because I feel like it's such a difficult topic in general. I'm really not a perfectionist. Okay, let me see if anyone has questions. I can't read your name because I believe it's Russian. That's why you need to give me your name. You said you look so beautiful with your hair. Okay. But not so much as your soul. I don't know what it means. I'm Catherine, a Catholic from Virginia. I also value poverty in our religious practice. It's an interesting comment. A lot of people expect Hasidim to be ascetics, to reject the material pleasures of life. And I think a lot of people on my tours are surprised to see a lot of designer stuff, and a lot of shops are really very overtly appealing to materialist end. For instance, with shop names like Royal or Majestic, it's really trying to be materialistic. And I think, especially the Satmar sect, there might be people who maybe embrace intentionally a plain life, but I think there's a lot of materialism in a certain sector, and I have seen an increase in a kind of, I don't know, I call it living for the Joneses. Which is always true in a very tight-knit community. But for those families that their standards of living are increasing, it goes along with an increased, I would say, materialism, or thinking about how others see you, and especially wealthy people do incredibly lavish festivals, weddings, which is so contra to the idea of all Hasidim as embracing a very simple life of minimalism and rejecting the luxuries of the material world. In fact, a lot of Hasidism embraces using the material things, like, let's say, silver, in order to worship. You almost elevate these material things by using them to worship. Like if you have a beautiful candelabra and you light it every Friday night, then that is not a bad thing. That is not a material thing. That is not now become a spiritual thing. And you see that now during the high holiday seasons with people buying very expensive citrons, these fruits. People on my tours are shocked that there are citrons, lemon-like fruit, advertised all over the neighborhood for $99. They have no idea that it could go for so much more money. But they're like, why would anyone buy a citron for so much money? But that's because the more you spend, the more you elevate the fruit into a spiritual realm. Moshe Mensch says, I have to disagree with the notion that Hasidim don't do a lot of professional work where you need lots of training. Let me see if he says anything else. No. Can you elaborate? I really did this live stream because I love to hear these kinds of comments. Please disagree with me. But of course, people do a lot of training. What I mean by a lot of training is really advanced, many years in universities. But the guy that I had in my video who talks about being an architect obviously does advanced training. Becoming a real estate agent, becoming a broker, all these take advanced training. I mean, many years in college. But even that, there has been an increase in people who go to college because the whole Zoom culture has made it possible for people who wouldn't want to mix in the secular universities to attend remotely or do a large part of it remotely. There are also more university options. So my mother was telling me that she went to the doctor, and to her absolute surprise, she says a blonde junge man, a guy with blonde locks, blonde locks, a young man came in and he was the doctor. She was absolutely shocked. To us, the idea of a young Hasidic man as a doctor is unimaginable, but I think it's going to be in the future. I think it's inevitable because Hasidic men are looking for work. They're looking for ways to make a living. And some of them are going to want to put in the investment of becoming doctors, even if it takes many years, because they have a built-in customer base and it pays off in the long run if they can put in the work. So I think even those careers like doctors and lawyers, of which there are very few Hasidim who specialize in, and we're talking Satmar Hasidim, we're not talking about sects in Crown Heights, like the sect in Crown Heights, Chabad. I think very few. There's going to be a lot more of that in the future. I think there's going to be a lot happening in the Hasidic economy in the future. It's going to be very interesting to see. I think so. I think it's going to explode. But you shouldn't be a prophet. You really should be careful with that, especially when there's a record. Moshe mentions. No. Shalva McDonald says, Shalom lekulam. Thank you. Eliran Sobel says, do you know the Hasidic economy is different from the Israeli Haredi economy? Because I know Haredi men only go to kollel and do not work. I wish I knew what's going on in Israel. I don't read enough. I just read an essay by Moshe Krakowski, I believe is his name, who wrote about how robust the academia is in Israel on Hasidic life and how impoverished it is in America. And I know it is impoverished in America because I read everything and there's very little that comes out of America. And I guess much of what's in Israel is in Hebrew, and my Hebrew is not up to level. But here's what I do know. I do know that Hasidic men, Haredi men, we say Haredi in Israel for the general umbrella of Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, they don't go to the army, and you can't work unless you go to the army. And the only way to get out of the army, I might be speaking out of my ass, excuse me. This is what I know. I'm by no means an expert on Israel. What I know is that how I understand it is they don't go to the army, and in order to be exempt from the army, they have to claim that they are working, that they are studying. You can't be exempt from the army except if you're a student. And I think that's why a lot of Hasidic men in Israel don't work. And that is a big part of why there's such an issue with a large majority of the Israeli population not working. And it breeds a lot of resentment. I do hear from my Israeli tourists a lot of anger towards the Haredi population because there's a sense that the religious Jews are not carrying the burden economically, and they're, what I have heard is that the religious Jews see themselves as carrying the burden spiritually, and for the secular Jews, that doesn't do it. That doesn't cut it. Moshe Gross says, I agree with at Moshe Mensch. It was more true until I'd say 10 years ago, but this is changing fast. Most certainly a lot is changing fast. That's definitely true. Shalva McDonald's is wishing a Gemar Chasima Tova, and I'm wishing her back. Eliran Sobel says $99 for an esrog. You can get a perfectly kosher ones for a lot less. Yes, but you know what? If it's a lot less, then it's not as holy. It's not. the value is not as high if you haven't sacrificed your money for the esrog. That's really where the mitzvah gets great, that you've sacrificed your money not to buy yourself, I don't know, you've sacrificed it for doing a mitzvah. That's why $99 makes it more special. Miriam Blooming says, I believe there are many Hasidim getting into the tech sector these days. I believe so as well. I think that studying the Talmud probably is a good, in some ways, a good preparation for a way of intellectually processing and thinking, a kind of analytic process that benefits Hasidic men in terms of going out for careers in the tech sector. And I have heard from my Israeli tourists that the ex-Hasidim in Israel are incredibly good workers in the tech sector, which I can see being true for all Hasidim in New York. I think studying the Talmud is very taxing on your attention span. It really disciplines you in terms of working with text. And I can see that translating well into the tech sector. And I wouldn't be surprised, again, making prophecies. Don't listen to me, I'm just guessing. But I think there's going to be a lot of activity coming out of the Hasidic economy in the coming years. They're going to be a lot more noticed for their work. The narrative that they're all poor and not studying is going to disappear. It's going to be impossible to hold on to that narrative. And I think that you're going to see probably in the tech sector a big imprint from Hasidic population. We already see some very important players. There was one guy in the village of Kiryat Joel who sold a program to Microsoft for, I believe, millions of dollars. I have to look that up again. Moshe Mensch says there's a lot of CPAs and attorneys and social work. That's true. There are a lot of CPAs, a lot of accountants as well. I think accounting is one of those things also you can study remotely largely. You don't have to do a residency like you have to do with medicine. Harry Weiss says, in Israel, many Hasidim study medicine and law. Why not here? Yeah, that's what I said. Medicine and law, I think, requires much more immersion in secular co-educational culture than studying for CPA, I believe. Suri Katz, if colleges stay true to their purpose, a lot more Hasidim would attend college. What do you mean? Please explain, Suri Katz, what you mean by that. You mean that colleges are not vocational places and that they teach too much ideology? That's what I'm going to guess you're saying. And perhaps they're definitely. My son is in public school, and the schools are very, very ideologically intense, and I can see it's at great odds with Hasidic ideology. And it's youth culture. You know, colleges are youth culture. It's where a lot of young people meet their spouses. It's dating. It's nothing that matches with Hasidic life. Jacob Rosenberg says Hasidim live off each other's successes because there aren't separate rich poor neighborhoods. The ultra rich and the poor live together and mingle together in shul, making it easier to make money. That is such a great point. Thank you for saying that. The geographic concentration of Hasidim cannot be understated in how valuable it is economically. Usually rich people move to rich neighborhoods. You go to Park Avenue and poor people will live in the slums, the ghettos. There's almost always a concentration that separates by economic status. And in the Hasidic community, the separations are seen by religious status. For instance, if you want to be a little more modern, you move out of Williamsburg, you move to Borough Park. And there is a great mixing of all sorts of economic levels, from the richest to the poorest. And that means that there is an excellent circulation of wealth within the community. So what we have a problem in American small towns, for instance, is the talented people generally will go to cities and they want to make it big. You leave and you make it, and then your town is where you grew up, your small American town out in wherever the boondocks, is impoverished of talent, is impoverished of innovation, and also of income. And what you see in the Hasidic communities, it's almost impossible to leave. People leave me comments when I talk about the economy about how this creates a an inability to leave. If you're so dependent on the community economically, then you can't leave, which is true. It is almost impossible to leave. You get married so young, you have so many children at such a young age. By the time you might think of leaving, you're economically tied, you're familially tied, and leaving is at such an absorbent cost. It is almost in most cases impossible, and that's why there's such a small rate of people who leave, and you have a lot more people who, if they don't fit in, instead of leaving, will rather try to stretch the boundary of within the community, and they'll move a little more to the left, or they'll move to Bar Park. They'll try to find a way that they don't have to sever their place in the community altogether. They can remain community members in good standing while also finding more freedom. And you see this concept of the Hasidic chill person, which I think is a result of how difficult it is to leave and having to find ways to stay while also maybe getting a little more breathing room if it's too suffocating. And because it is so difficult to leave, and I'm not saying my personal opinion, I left and was absolutely the necessary journey for myself. But what's really interesting is because it's so difficult to leave, the community retains its talent, and people are forced to stay and bring the talent into the community. And instead of leaving, if you have a beautiful voice and leaving and becoming a singer on the outside, you become an artist within the community, you be a celebrity within the community. And I think that is something that is a very, very vital part to the success of the economy. And it's also, again, it's a double-edged sword. It makes it near impossible to leave. I can't pronounce this Russian name, but it sounds to me like Manuka or something. In Argentina, there are many, if not the majority. The Hasidics are doctors, psychologists, teachers of public and private schools, engineers, nurses, etc., at least in Chabad. Malashka is the name. Thank you. I'm so sorry I butchered your name. So when I talk about the Hasidic community, I don't talk about Chabad. One day I'm going to do a video where I explain the different sects. Here's the problem. Williamsburg has about 10 major sects. It is not Satmar-centric. If it was only Satmar, then I would say Satmar. But there are many Hasidic sects. Satmar is the dominant one in Williamsburg, and Satmar is definitely the one that I am most speaking of. It is the one I grew up in, but it is extremely distinct from the Chabad sect, and you really, really can't speak for one and the other, I think, at the same time. I never think that I talk for the Chabad sect when I talk about the Hasidic community. I have to say Hasidic because it is an umbrella that includes Pupa and Vishnitz and Baba. Well, Baba, not quite. But there's Veen and there's Square and there's Pink. There are so many sects in Williamsburg that you can't just say Satmar, you have to say Hasidic, but it does not at all include Chabad, which is a lot different from my perspective. Like, I was walking in the park on Rosh Hashanah now, and four Chabadskers accosted me in a friendly way, and they made me listen to the shofar. And to me, they are such alien creatures. Like, there's nothing about them that I recognize because they do outreach, and I think doing outreach changes you so much, that interaction with the world, that Satmar Hasidim and the Hasidim in Williamsburg don't do. So I don't speak for Chabad. I speak mostly about Williamsburg Hasidim. That's how I will frame it, but it's predominantly Satmar. And yes, Chabad will have a much higher contingency of professionals, especially because they have Baal Tshuvas, which are people who are Jews that come in from the outside and return to the faith, return to Orthodoxy. And those might have grown up secular and gone to college. It's a completely different story, I think. So Cheryl says, Shalom, Miss Frida. Shalom, Miss Cheryl. And Jen says, Jen in Melbourne, Aussie, enjoyed your video on the Hasidic economy, but are there women who are the family's only income source and raising the kids while the men just study? It is a good question. I think it's very uncommon for women to stay breadwinners for life. I think women will often be the primary breadwinners until they have maybe 2-3 babies. But a man needs to be incredibly serious about his studies and needs to really prove that he is serious about his studies in order for him to be supported in the community for sitting and studying. Otherwise, he will be considered I think by most people, to just kvetching a bank, which means just to I think the literal translation is to squeeze a bench. It is like you're doing nothing but sitting on a chair all day. In places like Bar Park, the oxymoron is the more some of the places that are in some ways more modern, like Bar Park or Lakewood, will have a higher contingency of women who want their husbands to sit and study. So Williamsburg, which is considered extremely insular, is more like the 1950s in extremely rigid gendered roles. Women are at home, and maybe they work on the side as wig makers, or they have secretarial positions or teachers, and men are the ones who are the breadwinners. And when you get to neighborhoods where the wigs get longer and the people look more modern and stylish, you see more women who are the primary breadwinners and want their husbands to sit and study. But there was a very interesting poster in Curious Joel, where I grew up, over the kollel. The kollel is where married men sit and study. And it's shocking to me to see a picture of an announcement on the kollel saying, if you're not cut out for studying, go to work. There's, in the Satmar sect especially, very little patience for men who sit around and don't support the family, while their obligation first and foremost is seen as supporting the family, unless they're a true protege, they're a genius in studying, and then the kollel and the community will support them, or if they have a very wealthy father-in-law who will support them and want that. I think I was going to say something else, but I don't remember what. So I'm going to move on. Cheryl said she enjoyed my video last night. Thank you so much for watching it. As I said in the beginning, I did another version of the video that I completely scrapped after editing, which was really, really upsetting, but I felt like I needed to get it right, and I didn't like how I approached it. I didn't feel like it was telling the story. So I appreciate that you liked it. I feel like people want to hear my story. People want to hear me talk about my personal experience, but this, I feel like, is much more interesting and much more important. It's what drives me to do this. So I appreciate you watching. Thanks, Cheryl. I do not wear a sheitel. No, I do not wear a wig. Although some days I think it would be really easy to wear a wig. Moshe Mensch says the Curious Joel guy who sold his company, it's called Field One. Thank you so much. I appreciate you adding that. Suricat says, you got it exactly right. I expect the colleges to help students eventually earn a living. They take eventually to a whole new level. It shouldn't take years and too much money to support your family. Yeah, you're right. You have no argument from me. I was in graduate school for 2 years at Sarah Lawrence College, and people started to tell me, you know what, you're never going to be in Jewish academia. If you want to get into Jewish academia, forget it. It's impossible to get into it, and you'll need years and years of a PhD. And I had the opportunity to start to study the Hasidic community immediately by being a tour guide, and I dropped out. And a part of me regrets it, but a part of me thinks, how are you supposed to do it? I was a single mother of a young child. How are you supposed to go to college? It's so expensive. I paid thousands of dollars, and it seemed like an endless process. And in fact, this is also, I think, something that benefits the Hasidic community in some ways. There's very often a double-edged sword here. Some things that benefit also are disadvantages. A part of what benefits the Hasidic economy and also also is a drawback is not going to college. On the one hand, it's a drawback because you don't go to college. You don't have the career opportunities that college enables you to have. You also don't have the networking opportunities. But on the other hand, you also don't have the student debt. You don't have the huge fees, and you're not spending so many years of your youth in college. So Jane says shalom and good night. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Thank you so much, Jane. Jen asks, how accepted are the tours you run by the locals? Well, actually, right under you, there is a comment by Miriam, who I ran into yesterday, and she was, she was like other people in the community. Since I've been doing videos, people will greet me like Miriam, but Miriam wouldn't take me up on my suggestion that I come visit her and film her sukkah. But it's been very interesting that for a long time I was giving tours. I tried my best to be sensitive. I do know that what I do, in general, studying a live culture is always a delicate balancing act. It is. And I do sometimes feel like maybe we're objectifying people. I try as much as possible to be sensitive and to do it in a way that is humanizing. I don't know. I try to walk the fine line, but I feel like it's a gray area. If people are offended, I wouldn't begrudge them that, to be honest. And for a long time, I just tried to be quiet on the down low. People don't notice me too much, then I don't upset them too much. But since the video of Pearl got such tremendously good feedback, I am recognized by a lot of people who will say, "Oh, I watch your videos." And it absolutely floors my tourists because none of my tourists watch my videos. I always ask people on my tours, "Do you know that I do videos?" And they all say no. I say, "Well, how is it possible that no one on the outside knows about my videos? I have to come to the Hasidic community for people to have watched my videos." But what's really interesting is the people in the community who are, you know, they are the people on my tours expect the people in the community to be like angry or drawn and humorless, and the people on my tours are absolutely floored when they hear Hasidic men or women say, "Oh, I watch your videos." They're like, "What? How are they allowed to watch videos?" And they're almost ready to police whoever is talking to me. But it's very sweet. It's very refreshing, and it shows a very different side than a show like Unorthodox will show of drawn people and rigid people and people who are so one dimensional and so God minded. And it shows so much more dynamism. Like, of course, people who are, the adults have access, and of course, there's going to be a percentage of people word is going to get around. Let's see. Miriam said it was cool bumping into you. Well, it was extremely cool bumping into you too. This Desert, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, said, "I used to think Hasidim were all exactly the same since they dress the same. Actually, there are a lot of differences in dress, and one day we're going to get to that in a video." And Jen says to Miriam that when we visited New York a few years ago, there was a public sukkah at the New York Library. Yes, there was, but I want to see a Hasidic sukkah in Williamsburg, and I want to be hosted. Thank you, Cool Radio, for the Shana Tova. I'm wishing the same to you. And Eliran said, "Except that those within the community see differences in dress, of course." Yeah. YK asks, "Why did you leave KJ?" That's a long story. Here's what I'll do. When my YouTube channel has 10 million views, I'll get to working on a video on why I left KJ, why I left the Hasidic community. Moshe Mensch says Satmar Rebbe Joel Teitelbaum didn't believe in the whole idea of Kollel. Yes, that's true. I read a very interesting article in Tablet magazine that Hungarian culture in particular is very family values oriented. And the Satmar sect is notoriously Hungarian culture, although it's originally from the border of Hungary and Romania. Satmar is very Hungarian. For instance, Babov, I guess, is Polish. Lubavitch is Russian. The Satmar sect is very Hungarian, and I don't remember who the author of that article was. It was a really good article where he was writing about culturally Hungarian Hasidim are very family values oriented, and the traditional family is very much the center of everything. And it's very ironic because men are so much in a realm here. It's so much in some ways a men's world, like all the music videos in the Hasidic community. Part of why I don't spend too much time exploring that is it's so much a men's world. And I want to do something that is more fair to, that sees a little bit more the big picture. There's 50% of the population are women, and they're missing in something like music videos. So on the one hand, the more you go to the right with Hasidic sects like Satmar, the more the women will not play roles in these spheres, or the fewer women will be in public life. And yet, on the other hand, also there is a tremendous emphasis on family values. You see all of these couples walking the Williamsburg Bridge together, and the men, um, the women stay at home, and the men are expected to also take on a huge part of child rearing by taking the boys to the shul and so on. So it's an interesting contradiction. Yeah, the Satmar sect is very interesting. I think they're going to become more visible and more subject of conversation as that sect becomes more powerful. And all of these contradictions, I think, will become something to think about more. So let's see. Thank you all for your comments, by the way. Cheryl is asking if marriage is mandatory. What happens when neither wants to get married? I think almost everyone wants to get married. Something I like to do on my tours is take people to the toy store and to show the toys. And so much of the figurines, there are these little figurines called mitzvah menschis. There are several brands. So much of them are actually brides and grooms. There's so much in the toy culture that is about family life. Mommy and Tati, mothers and fathers, and the children and brides and grooms. And you can really see how much in childhood, how much of childhood is a preparation for marriage, how much of childhood is preparing you for marriage. So I think that kind of tremendous inculcation on the children of your entire future is about getting married and setting up a family is very effective. You see it role modeled with older siblings, and I think it becomes impossible to imagine anything else. If all of your friends get married, there's social pressure to not be left out. So I think if someone really doesn't want to get married, probably it would be very hard for them to stay in the community. I think there's very little room to be single in a world that is so family oriented. I think your question was about marriage, not about being an out of wedlock partnership. And I answered your question based on that assumption. Moshe says that Field 1 was sold for $39 million. That's crazy. Wow. Cheryl says, do Haredim marry intercultural? Do they marry within different groups? Is that your question? It depends. It depends. My family wouldn't do matches outside of Satmar, but I think a lot of people do marry outside of Satmar. But if you mean intercultural, as in different races, then like non-Jews or no. I mean, we're talking Hasidim. Again, my caveat is I speak of Hasidim in Williamsburg, that population. But I think we can speak for Haredim in general, don't marry in one big intermarriage festival, anyone. Hello from Spain, Antonio. It's 12:28 a.m. Please go to sleep. It's very late. Moshe said, when are you going to share your personal story? As I said, when I have 10 million views, not subscribers, views on my channel, I will get down and I will see if I can do a video where I tell my story. I'll have to animate it. I'll have to do visuals. So it's going to be a lot of work. I'll have to make it in a way that is interesting. You don't want to hear me just tell the same old off the derech leaving orthodoxy story. So it's going to take a while. But first, I need to have some views. I'm bribing you guys. You can share my videos. I put in a lot of work in them. Get me there. So Chaim Ben Chaim said, can your story about leaving the hut? Okay, you're asking the same question. Color Radio says, now New York City has a lot more unofficial sukkahs. Yeah, the sukkah is the hut that people put up for the holiday now, sukkahs. I don't know what you mean by unofficial sukkahs. There are lots of huts everywhere in Williamsburg. It's a great time to visit, by the way, now this season. And you can come on my tour. You're invited, but you can just go by yourself, visit the neighborhood. It's very lively. Holiday season. We had the chicken ritual yesterday called Kapars, which I'm going to do a video we filmed. I ran into Miriam, and I'm going to publish that. And there's also now there's a very lively scene of selling things for sukkahs. And then it's going to be sukkahs is also very lively in the streets. And you'll see all the huts. I'm still looking for someone to host me for a visit to their sukkah so I can do a little video to share with you all. So I'm putting it out there. Shayas Rosenberg asked if my English was this pretty inarticulate, no accent. Thank you so much for the compliment. Actually, it's interesting. Some people pick up my accent and some people don't. But I don't hear my own accent. I guess people can't hear their own accent. But I remember when I was in 11th grade, I had a very hard time reading Sherlock Holmes. It was very difficult, the English. But I think Sherlock Holmes is very difficult, English in general, for anyone. Moshe, thank you for saying your videos are refreshing. Antonio says, how do Hasidim feel about the LGBTQ community? I think we talked about how heteronormative this community is. They're expected to get married to the opposite sex and have many, many children. So I think that tells you where this community stands. There's no concept of LGBTQ at all. Thank you, Jen, for saying you enjoy my videos so much. I put in a lot of work, so I'm taking all the compliments because I want you to enjoy it. That's why I do it. Miriam says, do most people who join your tours have neutral opinions on the community, or are they usually biased one way or another? Oh, that's a good question. I get a lot of people who have watched Unorthodox and have a very negative view. And I also get a lot of people who have read articles about Hasidic education and have a very negative view. And people will say to me very often, they all don't work and they all take our tax money to live off our tax money while they don't work. I'll hear it all the time. And sometimes I'll say, no, not in Williamsburg. In Williamsburg, the men work. We're visiting all these shops. You see all of these shops. They're owned by Hasidic families. They're owned by Hasidim in the community. You see a lot of people working. You see all these teachers getting children on buses. They work. And literally, people will often not believe me. They'll tell their friends, no, I read. They don't work. They sit and study. And the wives are the ones who support them. I'll say, no, that's maybe true in Lakewood. This is not true in Williamsburg. And people are what's unfortunate is it's become an issue where there's a very compact narrative. People will say, the Amish, we don't care about them because the Amish don't take our tax money because the Amish officially, as far as I know, I'm no expert on the Amish, don't actually take funding from the government. Do they not take any funding? Is there no roundabout way that money comes into the Amish? I have no idea. But a lot of people have adopted this very, very simple narrative. We don't begrudge the Amish their way of life because they don't take any money from the government. But Hasidim, they take money from the government, and that makes it a very and they then go and they live in this way of life where the children are not properly educated. That is not okay. And I'll often get incredible resentment. People are foaming at the mouth as they say that. And I have seen people come on the tour with a sense of the government needs to step in here. This way of life is outrageous. This needs to end. And there's nothing I can do to disabuse a person of their perspective. Very, very, very infrequently does someone on the other end have this extremely romantic notion of a perfect life that I would feel like, whoa, you're really, really out there with thinking this is a perfect world. No world is perfect. I think I've not really seen people fall on that end, but I've seen a lot of people fall on the end of, yeah, say whatever you want. The government should step in. There's something very wrong here. Which is a big result of both media coverage as well as shows like Unorthodox, which the Hasidic community completely doesn't understand the effect it has on popular conceptions of this population. That it is, for most people, the primary way of understanding Hasidic Jews is through the Netflix show Unorthodox, and it makes a huge impression. People will literally cite things from Unorthodox and repeat it to me as fact. They do this and this. I have seen it on Unorthodox. And it's a shame because people, when I was critical of that show, people said to me, it's just fiction. Why would you care? Enjoy it. It's just entertainment. But of course, it's not taken as fiction. If you read the reviews, people will say it's such an interesting look inside the way the Jews live. That was a great question. Thank you. All of your questions. Thanks, Jen. Harry says, come to Staten Island. You are welcome. There are many new Hasidim all working hard. I actually have a cousin in Staten Island. So, yes. Aliron says, I can join the compliment train because it's not an inherently negative perspective. Thank you, I think. Moshe Mensch says, funny that they saw we are living off their tax money when I pay $21K a year for public school kids. See, this is the other perspective. We're going to wrap up in a little bit. It's 45 minutes. But the other perspective that I hear from Hasidim is we send our children to private school. We pay taxes on our homes for school funds, for public school funds, and we never benefit from it. But then we still have to pay tuition. So we pay all this money into the coffers and we get nothing out of it. And there was a lot of resentment from the Hasidic community. That led to a big debacle in Rockland County, where I lived for years and where my son was actually in public school, where Hasidim have a huge population, and they didn't. They felt like their tax money wasn't represented in a way that felt fair to them, and they got involved. They got elected in wide margins to the school board, and they were then making decisions. The people who were on the board and the organizers, whoever was involved in that, were making decisions for public school children without having children in the public school, and that was a big story on one of big public radio shows. And I think at that time I talked to a lot of people, and you heard a lot of resentment. We pay so much money into public school funding, and we get nothing in return. So it's interesting that there are two sides. I'll hear from a lot of people, we pay all this money, we still pay sales tax, we still pay income tax, we pay property tax. And then on the other end, we'll hear, if you want to get any government funding, if you want programs, then you need to live to live by the way that you need to live by the law, which is you need to give your children standard secular education, equivalent to what secular education in public schools are. So I think on both ends, they're very strongly held opinions. And it's, I guess, not surprising, because when people's money is involved, then strong opinions are involved. Harry says, many sukkahs here in Staten Island. Yes, I imagine so. Zizer said, it's because in Israel, the state pays for men to study Torah while women must work. I don't know. I can't confirm that. I hear what you're saying. Eleron says, you mentioned education. Are you planning on talking about the recent New York Times article? Well, actually, today there was a podcast that came out on Jewish Currents where I am interviewed with Naftuli Moster, the executive director, the outgoing executive director of Yafed, the organization that has been behind the entire push to force change in the secular education program for Hasidic boys. And we disagree on a lot. I did not hear it. I didn't hear what it sounded like. I'm sure I make a lot of gaffes. But you can head over there and hear what I think. I also wrote a blog post about it, where I said what I think about government intervention into this community's education system. In general, I think it is a very complicated subject, and I think it has to be approached with a lot of cultural sensitivity, which I think people on the outside often don't have. And my biggest disagreement with Naftuli Moster was, if you don't approach this with cultural sensitivity, you will cause the opposite reaction from your intended reaction. You're going to cause the community to double down. You're going to cause a reactionary conservatism, a kind of instead of this natural openness to change, you're going to end up causing things to stagnate and become very resistant to change. And his response to that was essentially, that's not my problem. They need to change. They need to change their system. It's hard for me to even relay the way he sees it, but he doesn't think it's his role to be culturally sensitive. It's his role to expect change. If the rabbis respond by becoming more extreme, then it's the rabbi's problem. And he holds the rabbis to account, which I on the one hand, I understand where he's coming from. He says, they're rabbis, they're a lot more powerful than me. But on the other hand, if you're looking at the bottom line, if you're looking for affecting change, then I think that approach is not going to yield that. And it hasn't been yielding that. I think it's been yielding a very strong reactionary movement. So Miriam asked if I show New Williamsburg or do I mainly walk Old Williamsburg. I love New Williamsburg. It's very fancy. It's very stylish. It's very young, a lot of children. There are children everywhere. You're going to see the footage that I'm working on. It's like wild how many children there are in this neighborhood, and I love it. But in the newer areas where the community is expanding to, it's younger. An interesting thing about this population is people often live in their same home for life. So there's a little bit of a youth, an age difference in between the older section of Williamsburg and the newer section of Williamsburg, because the older people settled in the older section years ago, and now they're grandmothers, and they don't have so many young children. There aren't so many young families, and then the newer section is like popping off with so many children and young families. So I like the new section. It isn't so close to trains. The G train goes by there, but it is no good for me because the G train is Brooklyn local. So I have a problem with going to the new section just for convenience sake, but I find it personally more palatable because the older section is incredibly dirty and people constantly mention it. It's a really, really, really bad look how dirty the streets in the older section are. And it's a nice contrast to see both the new and the old. One day I'm going to walk through all of the Williamsburg front to back and I'll show you a video of it. Not Miriam, because Miriam lives there. Caller Radio says, all please stay safe and healthy. And as a community, we must take care of ourselves and not rely on any government. Am Yisrael Chai, thank you. Joe says, Jen's husband and also a big fan of your YouTube channel. Question generally, how happy and content are the Hasidic community members with their lifestyle? I don't know. I think there are happy people everywhere and unhappy people everywhere. But I really can't speak for people. I definitely don't think that there is a huge population of oppressed minions that rabbis are ordering around like it is in the imagination of a lot of outsiders. A lot of people suffer. Life is hard, right? A lot of people have better luck than others. Tragedies happen everywhere. Humans, it's never perfect. It's never great, and it's never as black as it might seem from the outside. Okay, the last few questions, and then we're wrapping up. Moshe says the community's evolving, like a sort of Haskalah movement from within. There's an enlightenment movement from within. I'm not going to argue with that. It's indeed a very interesting change internally. The community grows with it comes as so many opinions that were shunned just 10 to 20 years ago. The only thing that holds so far is education institutions. This is a big question, a big comment that we would have to unpack on another day, because there's a lot of internal change. A lot of people think this is a population that is in stagnation, but actually there's so much change lately. It's hard to keep up. John Harvey says, what is your view on the schools bill in the UK? It will mean yeshiva in the United Kingdom will be liable for inspections as any other educational institution. I have no idea. All I can tell you is years ago, I spoke to someone who was an inspector in schools who told me that he intentionally looked the other way in order to not make it. He wasn't looking to make things complicated. I have no idea. where it's going to go. I can't speak for the UK. I really don't know much that's going on in the UK. I hesitate to speak outside of what I know. Where are the best places to find out about minor Hasidic groups? I'd want to know as well. I'm trying to find out people who will speak to me about their Hasidic sects outside of Satmar, so I can put together a little video of, like, if you're from Spink, say I'm Spink and this is what Spink means to me, so I can try to represent them, because personally I don't know so well about different Hasidic groups. When I go to Bar Park where my grandmother lives, I see these hats, I see these clothing, I think belts. I'm never quite sure. I don't really know so well some of the sects that are a little different. Like in Williamsburg, all the sects are very similar. Some of them are a little more modern, considered more modern, like Wien, but they're very similar. But in Borough Park, you see different garb, more different garb, and I really don't even know which sects they belong to. Shame on me. I'm going to put together a video and then I'll learn. No, I don't think Hasidim men will marry out of their culture. And Miriam says, and this is our final comment, Miriam is from the Hasidic community, so I guess she gets to have the final comment. I find that the people who support Yafet are often the same disgruntled people who jump on the Twitter bandwagon to bash the community at every opportunity. So most find it hard to believe that they mean the good of the community with their advocacy for change in educational standards. I do think that if I was trying to change the community, I would never approach it the way Fed has approached it. In fact, I have tried to find a place in this community as a tour guide, and I approached it in a way that was cognizant that you need to earn people's trust, that you need to come with intentions that are seriously not going to harm the population. If you want a place, or especially if you want change, then you seriously have to come with intentions that aren't going to harm the population. I think that's obvious. And I think Yafed has not made an effort to, or has at least allowed itself to become a vehicle of criticizing the community and becoming, instead of cooperation with the community, to become an embattled, trying to ramrod in change. I think it's foolhardy. I would not approach it that way. If I really want to change, I would take it a very different way. But a lot of people are angry at me for saying this. And a lot of people feel like you have to do whatever you can to affect change. So obviously, there are very different perspectives on this. And I am sure the education issue is going to continue to be on the forefront. And that's why I think it's also important to speak about the education issue and the economy. For me, finally, what I will say is the Hasidic economy is very interesting because it shows some of the benefits of organizing, of patronizing each other. It shows that you don't need years and years of training if you have other things like support. So I think those are some of the good things. There are also, of course, drawbacks. You're extremely dependent on the community. If you fall out of good standing, your entire livelihood is in jeopardy. And also because of the lack of secular education, it's one of the reasons why it's almost impossible to make it on the outside. So your options are limited to staying within. And both of these issues, the education and the economy issue, I think are going to be more on the fore in the coming years as the education battle continues. Thank you all for joining me and asking questions. This was very enjoyable for me. I hope you found it interesting and that you took something away from it. I hope I answered your questions. I want to wish you all a very sweet, we say Gemar Simatova, a good verdict on the holiest day of the year coming up, Yom Kippur, and great high holidays. And perhaps I will do this again sometime if you leave me comments that this is something that you find particularly interesting or helpful. Good night to all. Thank you. Thank you, Hidden Yid.